Dracula, Blood Moon. Written by Jack Stone. April 2026. Chapter 1. The Dead Awake. Whether he knew it that morning or not, this body was soon to be cold. His heartbeat pulsing, his sweat salty. I was locked into the veins of this man who was deep into my castle searching for treasure and was slowly regaining my strength. I would need more. After 333 years, I awoken. The glint of sun from the morning dew stinged my cheeks. This was the most alive I have felt in many years. I welcomed the pain. Long after the old world fell, new kings rose to take its place, different banners, different crowns, yet driven by the same hunger for power. They carved into sacred lands, as if time itself had no memory. But the moon remembered. On the 1000th crimson moon, the sky itself bled. And deep beneath the earth, something ancient stirred. I did not wake from sleep. I woke from memory. The blood moon didn't call for vengeance. It called for balance, though men would never understand the difference. As my first victim in over 3 centuries ragdolled on the cold stone floors of my home like a puppet, I sensed a familiar presence, one of ego and duty and blindness. As I walked, I was reminded of the world I had left behind. A lone knight crossed my path in the distance, armored with purpose, as though such things had ever protected men from what they could not comprehend. So man still fights one another over power and pride. It was almost comforting in its predictability. This is nothing new to me, for I have seen several kings and queens, and they're all dead now. As the knight continued his patrol route, I blended into the shadows like velvet paint and slowly followed behind. I let him take one last glance at the morning light, one last breath of life. Then I raised my right hand, with my claws extended and bleeding, and sliced into the knight's armor, with mild resistance from his fat flesh. Ah, a proper kill. The silence that follows it is intoxicating. The world stays still as it loses a part of itself. The clouds slowly gather, and what was once a sunlit morning rising to meet the stars now is a gloomy, smoky, forsaken sky. I could not walk down the marble stairs that once met my castle to the earth's body. It was in ruin, but my vampiric dark gifts allow me the ability to glide or float down from great heights like a shadow. Slowly I eased to the ground, my leather soles rubbing into the red clay that was beneath the stone, beneath the lake on which the castle stood by. Large brushes, overgrown vines, a spider's home, and a fading post sign. This was what was left of my beloved homestead. Before, the windows gleamed a ruby red, and the castle had great halls filled with libraries of dark arts and more. Now it appears the ever-changing world has affected my beloved home. But I will rebuild, as I always have. Ahead of me stretched a road, worn by the passage of men who believed themselves important. It led toward a village, and toward what I required to endure. If I traveled beneath the cover of night, I would remain unseen. Whoever now claimed the throne would not know I walked his land. Not until it was far too late. It was along this road that I encountered the old man. He stood as though he had been waiting, unmoved by my presence, his eyes carrying something far older than fear. When he spoke, it was not with surprise, but with recognition. He remarked that I walked heavily for one so pale, that the ground itself seemed to remember me. His words were not those of a man guessing, but of one who already knew. So I asked him plainly if he knew what stood before him. The old man gave no direct answer, only a quiet certainty, as if to say that if I needed to ask, then the truth had already revealed itself. I told him I had no hunger for this world, yet he answered that the world had never lost its hunger, and that it devoured without restraint. He spoke as though warning me, though I could not tell if it was for my sake or for theirs. He continued, saying the air itself carried my return, that the wind knew my name, and that even the fallen leaves had turned at the moment I rose, that the moon forgets nothing, nor does the blood bound to it. There was no fear in him, only understanding. He remained. I asked him why he chose to walk a world that had forgotten all it once feared. Silence settled between us. His cold green eyes held mine, unblinking, unmoved, as if to say, "Because of you." And in that moment I understood. He was not merely a man, but a keeper of tales, a quiet witness to my sins. Unseen, ignored. Yet it was souls like his who carried my story forward, whispering it into the next age. We all serve our parts in a greater design, and he was fixed upon the board, a necessary piece in this endless cycle of death and rebirth. He told me then of a village beyond the ridge, a place built upon graves never buried, where the past had been ignored rather than laid to rest. He said I would find what I sought there, or perhaps discover that it had already begun seeking me. Brisewood. By the time I left him, the sun had climbed higher. As the day grew brighter, I was forced once more into shadow. Attics, archways, the cover of a hood, anything to dull the sting of the light. Even then, it burned, a constant reminder of what I had become. This was the cost of walking again among the living. When I reached the village of Brisewood, I found it broken. Mud clung to every path, rot lingered in the air, and neglect had settled into its bones. It was a place abandoned long before its people realized it. Yet even in its decay, it offered something useful. Corners that bent just enough, structures worn in such a way that something like me could vanish within them. Still, there is no refuge like death itself. So I found shelter among the remains of the forgotten, and I waited, in the silence of dust and bone, for night to return. The graveyard nearby was no creation of careful hands. It had grown as though the land itself had refused to let go of those taken by the castle. Stones stood where none had been placed, names etched by no living hand. It was said the fog that rolled down each dusk carried their whispers, though few remained willing to listen. When night finally came, I lowered from the clay-tiled rooftops, threw my ragged hood over my head, and began to blend into the night life of this small village. Walking in the alleys, there was such a display of poor moral choices and vagrant living. Men drinking themselves to a stupor, as they always have, now where, equipped with unnatural light that appeared to be floating near their doors and darkest alleys. This made the humans more bold, more ornery. Belief, the simple outline of a stranger in the dark, would make someone freeze or cower from the unknown. Now, they yell into the dark, proclaiming the shadow to come out, for they fear nothing, and then laugh amongst themselves of an empty threat, not met by any seen opposing force. Cowards. The women threw themselves onto these drunken fools as to reward them of their braveness. Has the world lost its general sense or moral of what is right or what is wrong? Did I sleep and awoke in hell? As the night grew closer to morning, Their voices carried through the dark. They spoke of bodies found drained, of marks upon the flesh, of old warnings dismissed as superstition now made real before them. Panic spread quickly that morning. Doors were shut, children hidden, and calls were made for priests and protection. Despite their fouled new way of living, humans have gotten more efficient at cowering away from a threat. It humours me. I could as easier step to their front door, knock or blow it down with my breath, and there would be nothing they could do about it. Braver ones spread tale, and this era's shining warriors were summoned to the dead bodies. They believed something had come for them. They were right. After listening into a small gathering, I used the giant oak trees that Brisewood was known for back into the forest, from whence I came. As I neared my old home, I overheard a small man telling another man about my devilish deeds. Word travelled faster than truth ever could, and before long, the king was informed by his scouts of a shadow moving through Brisewood, and of a name long buried with the wars of old. My name. Chapter 2. Heart of Life. A few weeks after my return, I was awoken one evening in my coffin, the lid being knocked on with anger and haste. My eyes opened. Who dared echo my sleep chambers? With one of my dark gifts that had returned to me, I quickly shadowed into mist and appeared behind this fool. He froze instantly. I twisted his neck, I licked his sweat, and peeled back his scarf only to see my steps laid before Renfield. My loyal, stupid servant. I pushed the fool back with authority to remind him only disturb me if I were to be killed while asleep. Inside my dead heart, though, I was glad to see something from my former era still in this new world. Renfield was soft-spoken as he always was, still wearing the brimmed hat I found him wearing before I partially sunken my teeth into his dirty, homeless neck, a stain on my past of my first week as a vampire. I was foolish, thirsty, and didn't know the difference between a rat and a noble. Well, that's change. His hat was now paired with as equally as dirty coat. Nothing fitting, of course. That would require too much thought for this man. He greeted me, and mentioned that without me, he is nothing. He was right. I gave him near mortal life when I bit into that foul neck centuries ago. But he was loyal, and as always, he came to find me when I woke, and update me on the new world. Sometimes, he would even save items from my former life. An endless token of gratitude for sparing what was left of a pathetic husk of a body. I should kill him. He spoke of it without a doubt, that the village guards told the king, and the orders came to each village to double the watch. What followed was more concerning for me, however. Renfield spoke that the king sent a messenger out to the old Claremont's hut. That name. Next to Helsing, the Claremonts were always attempting to rob me of this second life. There were paid monster hunters, mercenaries, hired and driven by shiny objects. With Helsing, there was conviction and passion. I truly believe he thought he was doing the right thing. That's what made our encounters more interesting, almost a rival friendship, showing each other our new talents and tools. But Claremont clan. Their perverted minds are what drive them. Nothing of belief or glory or honor, just who looks or acts different, and who pays to have it in a potato sack. I am surprised they have lived this long, however. Most of my rivals are long dead, sitting in my graveyard at the castle, but Cain Claremont must have had a child after our last battle. I thought I took all that there was a man out of him. Guess life found a way. They were known to carry the era's most deadliest weapons, and usually used beasts as well to aid in capture. One of my first children born of darkness, Melia, was a beautiful noble's chambermaid before, and she was more intoxicating after she became like me. Wings of dark blue as the oceans, and a shiny twinkle to her porcelain skin that shimmered in the moonlight. Melia and I were hunted by the Claremonts one evening while feeding, and while I got away, she, my poor dear, was grabbed by the teeth of one beast, and it hooked into her wing, then ripped it right off. I watched in the dark as she was eaten by a pack of these wild animals. The Claremonts then defiled the corpse further, almost as if they knew I was watching. Renfield, after letting me know what lied ahead, gave me a new cloak, something that will blend into the modern world. It was purple and made of a smooth velvet cloth. He also gave me the location of a nearby village, Marina, a lake village that brimmed of life, ripe for the plucking. To the west, I sensed it clearly, the presence of life, clustered and unaware. Another village, another gathering of warm blood, beating hearts, moving without understanding what walked toward them. They believed themselves safe. They always do. And so I followed to the beat of their hearts. Marina, a village shaped by water and wind, where the air itself carried unease. It was here that my name had already begun to spread. They whispered it among themselves, thinking it would somehow lessen its weight, as though speaking it softly might prevent it from being heard. But fear travels well, especially on salt air. They spoke of me as something returning, something remembered, something they had been warned of but never truly believed in, and in their doubt, they had made the same mistake as those before them. They prepared, of course. Men always do. Guards were placed, watches set, oaths spoken in the name of duty and lineage. I heard one such man speak of his family, of a name bound to the defense of the realm, of a burden passed through blood as though it were something noble. The Claremonts. So, they have returned and are here now, in this village. With my new royal purple cloak, gifted from my servant, I was able to get close and overheard one of the hunters. He spoke of duty as though it could stand against inevitability, as though belief alone could shape the outcome of what was already set in motion. I did not interrupt him. Time would do that for me. And time always sides with me. By the time I left that place, the pattern had begun to repeat itself. Fear, denial, preparation, and then silence. Each village believing itself different, believing it would fare better than the last. None of them ever do. The hunter was never able to spot me, though he did brash a new weapon. It appeared to shoot fire from 2 metal poles, and he seemed limited on how much he could wield this magic. Little containers, most likely the elixir for his magic, would be stored on a belt. His beasts failed to catch me as well. Their noses worked, oh, they are always powerful, but there are no footsteps to trace. I do not waste my time touching this soft earth. A short chase, a few scared faces, and I was lost, out of their reach. Chapter 3. The False Priest. By the time the hunt was over, it was near dark again, as I got closer to the dead woods. Deeper into the forest, I came upon a small mound that sprouted from the earth. Next to it was a dirt path. Following out of curiosity, I continued till it forked. It was then that the path divided. A crossroads, long worn by those who had come before, though few likely understood its weight. One road led back, toward stone, toward memory, toward the place where I had first awakened, the castle, and the crypt that still held what remained of my former strength. After this hunt, it might be our ideal time to break. The other road led forward, toward something new, toward defiance. I paused there, considering not the choice, but the consequence. To return would mean patience, to rebuild slowly, to reclaim what had been lost piece by piece, to become once again what the world had once feared without question. But forward. Forward meant confrontation. The scent carried on the wind told me enough. This was to the Holy Temple, a city beyond, frozen in both climate and belief, where a priest had taken it upon himself to speak against the night, to deny what could not be denied. He had taught kings that men could starve the darkness. He had made himself a symbol, and symbols have a cost. So I chose forward. The land grew colder as I approached, the world itself hardening as though it sought to resist me. Ice formed where water once flowed, and the structures of men stood rigid and unyielding, as though permanence was something they could achieve through will alone. But even here, I was remembered. Even frozen, they remembered me. Stone, wood, water buried beneath ice. This place had once known silence, not the peace of it, but the kind born from fear. I had built that silence long ago, and they had mistaken it for weakness. Now they would remember the difference. I slipped past the temple guards and headed straight into the holy temple's deepest chambers. Candle-lit corridors and heavy scents filled the air. The priest had made himself central to their survival. His voice carried through the people, shaping their understanding, bending their fear into something useful to him. He spoke of sacrifice, of cleansing, of fire as salvation. With him, the darkness, myself, won't come to harm poor, innocent women and children. And in return, all he asked was complete control, more freedom than a king or queen and an army of believers. Passed down from generation to generation, I see, this family of control and hope. At some time between my rest, a smarter man played the fool's card to the people, and it worked, solidifying his legacy, as shown here with these gold-etched carvings, of a father mole, yes, dated only 17 years after my last cycle, quite a long time to keep a secret. But eventually, if you believe the lie long enough, it becomes truth. And so that is what this family had done. He had given them hope. And hope is a powerful lie. When I finally stood before him, there was no surprise in his eyes, only the quiet certainty of a man who had prepared for this moment without ever believing it would truly come. He spoke first, not with strength, but with justification. He asked if I understood what would happen if the truth were known, that the people would tear the place apart, that they would burn everything, including him, if they realized what had been done in the name of their safety. He claimed he had given them hope, that fear required a story to be controlled, and in that moment I understood him completely. He had not opposed me. He had used me. He had given them blood, and called it prayer. He denied it, of course. They always do. But power leaves a scent, and his was no different from the kings who came before him. He had simply found a more convincing mask, and I shall peel it from his soft, pampered face. What happened next was inevitable, whether by my hand or by my restraint. The moment carried weight far beyond the act itself. I stepped from the archway through which I had entered, and in the span of a breath, I stood behind him. With a sharp twist, I broke him. Perhaps too far. Flesh yielded. Bone followed. A cloud of dark mist swallowed what remained, and when it cleared, I held only his spine, swaying gently in my grasp, as though the body still lingered somewhere beyond it. I had never wasted so much blood before. And when it ended, when his voice was silenced and his certainty undone, I felt something within me shift. At first it was subtle, a dull pressure, spreading. Then pain, not the familiar burn of the sun, nor the hunger I had long endured, but something deeper, something changing. I could feel it in my bones. They cracked, not from damage, but from growth. My flesh stretched, reshaping itself as though responding to something newly awakened. This was not a return to what I had been. This was something else. Something born not just of hunger, but of consequence. I had crossed something unseen, and I was no longer what I had been when I began. Chapter 4. Frozen Waters Colder. As the priest's influence unraveled, the people turned as they always do, seeking something to blame, something to destroy in order to restore their sense of control. Accusations rose, voices broke, and soon the fires he had once commanded were turned upon others. They called it cleansing. They called it mercy. I had heard it all before, and through their chaos, through their fear and their desperate attempts to justify what they had become, I realized something far more important than their fate. I'm not what they say I am, but I am also not what I was, and whatever I am becoming, they are helping shape it. I moved through their streets as something remembered, something undeniable. Panic didn't rise slowly here. It erupted. Doors slammed. Fires were lit. Bells rang out into the frozen air as though sound itself might hold me back. It did not. Their fear turned quickly, as it always does, not toward understanding, but toward sacrifice. They sought something to offer, something to burn, something to blame, in order to reclaim control over what they could not face. And so they chose one of their own. They dragged her into the open, their voices breaking under the weight of what they told themselves was necessary. They claimed her suffering would protect the rest. I watched. Not because I needed to, but because I understood. This is what they become when they fear the dark. They burn each other and call it light. The flames rose high against the cold, her voice carried into the night, and still they believed they were doing what was right, that somehow this act would hold me back, that their faith, spoken loudly enough, might reshape reality itself. It never does. By the time the fire died, the village had already condemned itself. What followed was not chaos, but inevitability. I moved through them without haste. There was no need. Their strength had already broken under the weight of their own actions. Each life taken fed what had begun to change within me, deepening it, strengthening it, pushing me further from what I had once been. The night did not belong to them. It never had. But they didn't fall without response. This time they did not send frightened men or desperate beasts. They sent something else. Another Claremont hunter. Not one driven by panic, but by purpose. I felt his presence before I saw him. There was no fear in him, no hesitation, no confusion about what stood before him. He had come not to survive, but to end something. Perhaps he believed that something was me. He tracked me beyond the burning remains of the village, through the frozen paths and into the forests, where even the wind seemed to pull back. He did not rush. He did not call out. He understood patience. And for the first time since my return, I felt something close to recognition. When we finally stood before one another, there was no need for words. Men like him do not waste breath on what cannot be changed. He carried steel that had tasted blood before, and faith not in gods, but in action. As a gentleman, I would have preferred a more civilized way of combat, but my armory was inside the castle, and that was still out of reach. So, I relied on more brutal forms of defense. He struck first. Fast, precise, without hesitation. It had been long since anything had come close to touching me. But he did. Steel met flesh, and for a moment the past returned, echoes of battles long forgotten, of men who had once stood against me with the same unshaken resolve. He was not like the others. He adapted, learned, pressed forward even as the truth revealed itself, that I was not what he had expected, and not something he could easily overcome. What followed was not a slaughter. It was a contest, and in that contest he proved worthy. But worthy is not the same as equal. The longer it went on, the more the change within me revealed itself. Strength surged where once there had been restraint. Movement sharpened. Hunger deepened into something more refined, more controlled, more absolute. He began to understand. Not through fear, but through inevitability. And still, he did not retreat. Even as his strength faltered, even as his strikes slowed, he pressed forward, choosing to end himself in purpose rather than surrender to what stood before him. In another time, I might have respected that. Now, I ended it. When he fell, the silence that followed was different from the others. Not empty, but earned. He had come to stop something, and in doing so, he had only confirmed it. I was no longer returning to what I had been. I was becoming something else entirely. Chapter 5. Castle of Sin. The path behind me burned. The villagers had fallen. The hunters had failed. There was only one place left for this to end. The castle. The place where it began. As I returned, the world itself seemed to pull inward, as though drawn back toward its origin. The land grew familiar beneath my steps, as if carrying new weight. But I didn't return alone. The king had made his choice. He did not hide behind walls or send others in his place. Whether from pride, desperation, or the final grasp at control, he came himself, bringing what remained of his forces, not as a defense, but as a statement. This would end. Here. When we faced one another, it was not as rumor and belief, but as truth made manifest. He looked upon me not with denial, but with understanding too late to matter. He had seen what I had done. He had heard what remained, and still he stood. Kings always do. He spoke not as a man begging for survival, but as one defending something already lost. He claimed duty. They always believe that. But belief does not change what is. I could feel the weight of everything that had led to this moment, every village, every life, every choice that had shaped not just the world around me, but what I had become within it. This was not vengeance. This was balance, and he stood in its way. What happened next would not be decided by words. It would be decided, as it always has been, by what remains standing when the night is done. And I have always endured. And so we stood, at the end of all things that had led us here. The king did not kneel. He did not run. Whatever fear had once lived in him had already been spent in the days before this moment. What remained was something quieter, something closer to acceptance. He raised his blade not in defiance, but in duty. And I saw then that he understood. Not what I was, but what I represented. The end of their control, their reason to rule. Yet again, a man fights over power and pride. I was insulted by the gesture alone of being lowered to his level, by the thought that I did all this for more. Such a human trait. He came forward. The clash that followed was not one of equals, but neither was it meaningless. Steel met something far older than steel, and though his strength failed where mine did not, there was no hesitation in him. Each strike carried the weight of those he believed he protected. Each step forward, a refusal to yield. After several grand gestures with the weapon, his blade fell from his hand. Not in defeat, but in completion. He had done what he believed was required of him. And in that, there was something I had not seen in the others. He did not beg or plead. He waited. He waited for judgment. So I stood before him, the hunger still present, the power still rising, the change within me urging a final act, a conclusion written in blood, as it had been so many times before. But this time, I did not answer it. There is a difference between feeding and choosing, and in that moment, I chose. I stepped back, not as mercy or forgiveness. No, but as balance. His life was no longer required. The king looked upon me then, with relief, and with something far more dangerous. Understanding. He knew what had been taken. He knew what remained. And more importantly, he knew what would happen if this path continued. When he spoke, it was not to challenge, but to bind. He declared that the threat had been ended, that the shadow which had haunted the land would rise no more, that he himself had faced it, and that it had fallen. A lie, but a necessary one. He spoke further, not to me, but for what would follow. That there would be no more sacrifices, no more desperate attempts to control what could not be understood. And then, he gave something far more valuable than truth. He gave silence. He ordered the castle sealed, its paths blocked, its name forbidden, its existence pushed from memory and buried beneath decree and time. No man would approach it. No king would claim it. No priest would speak of it. It would be left alone. And in return, so would I, bound to silence that balance might endure. Like a true king, he ended the madness not with war, but with pardoning. I would be erased. And in that erasure, I would be free to hunt, unchallenged, unseen, and alone. I watched him as he turned away, carrying a victory that was not his, and a burden that would outlive him. His people would believe they had been saved, that their king had stood against the darkness and prevailed, and in that belief they would find peace. It was more than they deserved, but it was enough. The villagers left my castle with their torches and sharp objects, and when the last firefly from their lamps faded into the woods, I stepped out from the shadows. I took one last look at the moon, now blood-red, from the whole of my sleeping chambers, and then with relief I closed my coffin lid, sealing myself away for another cycle. Inside, for a moment, I saw a reflection, and it was a monster. Epilogue. New Moon. The years passed, then decades, then centuries. The world above changed as it always does. Kingdoms fell, names vanished, stories faded into myth, and myth into nothing at all. The castle remained, untouched, unseen, its silence preserved by fear long after the truth had been forgotten. And beneath it, I rested. Not as I had before, not in weakness, but in waiting. Time no longer held meaning. The hunger slept. The change within me settled into something deeper, something patient. The world moved on, and then I awoke. But this time, it was not the same world that greeted me. The air was different, thinner, louder, filled with a constant hum I did not recognize. The silence that once defined the land was gone, replaced by something restless, something unending. The sky no longer belonged to the stars alone. Strange lights cut through the darkness, unmoving yet ever present. The ground itself had been reshaped, carved not by time, but by design. Men had not changed, but their world had. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of time settle into something new. The hunger remained, but it was quieter now, controlled, focused, refined. Whatever I had become before had not faded. It had evolved. The castle, once hidden, now stood on the edge of something encroaching. The distant glow of a new world pressed against its borders, curious, careless, unaware. They had forgotten, all of it. The fear, the stories, the truth. They had buried it so completely that they no longer believed it had ever existed. I stepped forward, toward a horizon no longer defined by kings or villages, but by something far greater. A world that believed itself beyond the reach of the past. A world that believed the night had been conquered. I have seen such belief before. It never lasts. After 333 years, I walk again, and this time, there is no one left who remembers why they should be afraid.